Good morning. I'm Jonathan Capehart, opinion writer for the Washington Post. Welcome to First Look, Washington Post Live's one-stop shop for news and analysis. We're going to jump right into it right away. Lots to talk about. And joining me this morning is Annie Linsky, national political reporter who covered the 2020 campaign and is now our go-to reporter for the Biden-Harris transition. Annie, welcome.
Hi, good to be here.
So lots going on, lots of appointments that have been made already by President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris. But earlier this week, you wrote about concern among civil rights organizations that President-elect Biden hasn't been appointing enough Black officials in top roles. The Biden transition says that, hey, look, we've got about half of the cabinet level positions that have yet to be filled. But what are you hearing from Black leaders about what they're looking for and who they're looking for to be in top cabinet positions?
Yeah, the civil rights leaders that we've been talking to have been sort of sounding the alarm that in the early nominations that Biden has made, they're glad that there's been sort of a diverse group of people that he's picking, but the people he's choosing for the very top slots so far have largely been white, and they're looking at four top appointments: Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, the Attorney General, and I'm blanking on the
Attorney General,
Defense,
State,
Defense Attorney
yes.
General, and one that has already been done. And the problem
Treasury.
that they have.
Treasury
Thank
is
you.
The other one. Yes.
I have not had all of my coffee this morning. So Treasury and State have already been announced, and they've both been people who are white, and there were Black officials who had been considered for both of those jobs. And so now you only have left in that group Defense and Attorney General. And what's happening is there's more pressure being put on the Biden team to give a harder look at Black leaders for those two jobs. I mean, those four positions are kind of considered the premier jobs in an administration. When you look at the Obama administration, he had two different attorney generals, for example, who were Black, and they feel that this is not an unreasonable ask, particularly for a candidate and a president-elect at this point, like Biden, who actually stood up when he had his acceptance speech and said, the African-American community had my back. Mm-hmm. I'm going to have their back. And so the leaders that we've been talking to, point to those comments and say, look, we're getting a little nervous that maybe you don't have our back in the way that we thought you would.
So Annie, I think for context for viewers, one of the reasons why African-American civil rights groups, Black civil rights groups are pushing President-elect Biden on, now Attorney General and Defense Secretary is because they've made it clear they do not want to see yet again an African-American put into the cabinet position of housing and urban development or transportation, that they want to be part of the big four. There are a couple of names that I wonder from your reporting if you've heard anything. One is Jay Johnson, who used to be the counsel at the Pentagon, who then went on to become the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. His name has popped up as someone, and he's African-American, someone who's popped up as someone who could be the next either Defense Secretary or Attorney General. Any new rumblings you've heard about that name? And then I want to ask you about another one.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the slot for Department of Defense had sort of, for weeks and weeks, folks that we were talking to at the Pentagon had been assuming that Michelle Flourney would be getting that job, and she had almost been considered a shoo-in there. But when Biden announced his national security team, a week ago at this point, one name was missing, and that was defense. And sort of it had been expected he would have ruled out defense when he did those other appointments. And so that made people wonder what's going on here. And then we've separately had reporting that there have been some issues that Biden has with Flourney, that the two of them are not actually that close. These longtime relationships are what Biden really looks to. And that's when we also started hearing Jay Johnson as a possibility, particularly at the defense role. So I think that's very real. I definitely think that's very real.
Now, have you heard anything about Jay Johnson also being considered for AG?
That I have not. That has not come up again, at least with my sources. There have been some other names, for AG that we've been hearing, but it's. I've been hearing his name connected with defense in the Biden people that I've been talking to, and the Biden adjacent people I've been talking to as well.
I just want to, for clarification, just in case, because I think I might have said Jay Johnson was Secretary of HUD. He was Secretary of Homeland Security. So I just want to clear that up because I made that mistake. The other name I wanted to talk to you about in terms of AG is someone whose name I've only seen pop up in one spot, but who would seem to be a natural, and that's Tony West, who was the number 2 in the Justice Department under Eric Holder, who then left the department. Any reporting on whether his name is in the mix, and then I'll bring up why I'm asking this question.
Well, I have heard his name floated, certainly, and so his name is out there. It's absolutely fair to say that it's in the mix. There are a lot of things to like about him, but there is, of course, one fairly significant hurdle, which isn't really his fault, but he does have a relation. Is the brother-in-law of Vice President Kamala Harris. And that is something that I think makes it a little trickier for the Biden team. They are, with their appointments, trying to show that they are not doing, behaving similarly to the Trump administration, which had, relative to the president, at least in White House roles. And this would be different. It's not a blood relation. It's, there's some separation here, but it's a look that I think would be a little bit more difficult for Biden, particularly just given the approach that he has taken so far. But there are things to like about him, too. So, I know that he is being considered, but there is an issue there.
Right. He is the brother-in-law of the Vice President-elect of the United States, Kamala Harris. But on paper, his qualifications, were it not for that, he would be a relative shoo-in for the job. And also just that, he's the one who wrote the opinion within the Justice Department recommending to then Attorney General Eric Holder that the United States government should no longer defend the so-called Defensive Marriage Act, which set the ball rolling to marriage equality in the United States. Okay, Annie, we have to talk about another Biden appointee who has been a lightning rod, and that is Neera Tanden. What's the Biden team saying about the things that are coming from Republicans? Senator Tom Cotton saying there's no way she'll be confirmed. Other people saying, Nikki Haley saying she's, quote, deeply concerning. The hypocrisy and all that is mind-blowing from my perspective. But has the Biden transition had any response to Republicans going after Neera Tanden?
Yeah, I think what the Biden camp has said is that, look, once Republicans get to know her beyond the caricature a little bit, there is a very different story to tell. So they are trying to focus on her sort of hardscrabble upbringing. The concerns that the Republicans are raising is, ironically enough, about her tweets. And, she has been quite aggressive on Twitter. She's very pointed in some of her partisan remarks. She's referred to the Republicans as being in a cult. She has made comments about Mitch McConnell, and just sort of very cable news type partisan ways. And Republicans who did spend the last 4 years sort of trying to say, I did not read the president's tweet, have suddenly read, all of Neera Tanden's tweets. But still, by the tone that she is a departure in that the tone that Biden has tried to set so far has been she's been picking people who are very sort of under the radar and haven't made a lot of headlines. And so Neera Tanden is different in that regard. She's also, been the leader of one of the biggest Democratic think tanks. In fact, I believe the biggest Democratic think tank in Washington. she has been intimately involved in national security policy and domestic policy, healthcare policy, family policy, economic policy. And so she is from that perspective, just an ideal pick for Biden for the position of OMB director.
So Annie, then, given everything you just said, especially about how choosing Neera Tanden is sort of opposite of what President-elect Biden has been telegraphing in terms of tone, is there any credence to the thinking that President-elect Biden is willing to pick this fight and willing to wage this fight to get Neera Tanden confirmed?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Biden said so himself in so many words, I believe yesterday, saying that, look, they're going to pick a few people they're going to have big fights about. And if there's going to be a fight about Tanden, then she's a brilliant, and she's my pick. And she's going to be somebody who I'll go to the mat for.
All right, Annie Linskey, we have run out of time. Just as we were really getting into it, Annie Linskey, thank you very much for coming on First Look.
Great to be on with you.
Now let's go over to the opinion side of the Washington Post, where we will find contributing columnist Kathleen Parker and deputy editorial page editor and columnist Ruth Marcus. Kathleen and Ruth, thank you very much for coming on.
Good morning.
Good to see Kathleen, you. Yes, I want to start with you, Kathleen, and continue the transition discussion. What do you make of the concerns over President-elect Biden's recent appointments? In your last column, you issued a warning to the incoming administration, to the communications staff, to beware of celebrity journalists. What do you mean?
Well, those are two separate questions. What do I think about the appointments?
I take that one first and then do the celebrity journalist thing.
If you live by identity politics, you die by identity politics. It's very, Biden is in a terrible situation because he's made so many promises to so many people. And if you look at some of the comments regarding the appointments thus far to the higher positions, it almost seems as if Latinos, for example, want exact number of Latino appointments that correspond to the percentage of the population they represent. And if you go down the line doing that kind of calculation, you're never going to please everybody. But thus far, it's not over yet. I think he has some opportunities to fill some of those slots in ways that are satisfactory to Democrats. And of course, as far as I'm concerned, Representative James Clyburn is in charge of the show. He's our South Carolina representative and the longest serving representative in the House of Representatives. And he has, he gets credit for basically handing the nomination to Biden when he got South Carolina voters to, first of all, when he endorsed him, and then of course got South Carolina voters to back him, and specifically Black women who were largely behind the push and then throughout the Southeast and on and on. So I think Representative Clyburn has a lot to say, and I think Vice President-elect, or President-elect, excuse me, Biden has to pay attention. Now on to the all-women team in communications. First of all, applause. That's great. But I want the column I wrote to which you refer was sort of a caveat in terms of just because the media has hated Trump, I made the mistake I loathe. Just because they've not liked President Trump doesn't mean they're going to give President Biden a pass, and they're certainly not going to be necessarily kind and deferential to these women. I'm sure they're tough enough to withstand the heat, but they shouldn't take for granted this notion that they'll have an easier ride by virtue of their being with the candidate that the media obviously preferred. There's a point I've always tried to make to everyone regarding the bias in the media. There's no question that we're all fallible and we're all human, and there are certainly biases that can be documented. However, when it comes to the reporters and the press corps and the White House press corps and across the board, at least in the many, many years I've been on newspapers, reporters really only care about the story, and they don't care whose story it is. If it's a good story, they're going to go for it, and they're going to, they'll run over whoever's in their way. even if they liked them previously, even if they sat next to them in makeup at CNN previously. It's not, it's not a dance. It's well, if it is, it's not fun to watch. I think they should beware
Yeah.
and be very cautious going in.
So Ruth, let me bring you in here and ask you, one, if you have any reactions to what Kathleen said, and to also get your perspective on the cabinet appointment, the cabinet appointment dance here. What do you make of Kathleen's assertion that if you live by identity politics, you die by identity politics?
Funny, I was just about to quote that statement because I have to say that nicely that I bristled at it. I think that what Kathleen is talking about as identity politics could also be phrased as trying to ensure something that President Trump ignored for 4 years, which is a cabinet and administration that looks like America. And the really remarkable thing, because I've watched this play out, I watched it in the Clinton transition when he bristled because he was criticized for not having enough women in his cabinet or in his top appointments, and he bristled at quote unquote bean counters. I watched it when President Obama came and he was criticized for bringing in too many Hillary Clinton people and ignoring his own folks. And I think one of the remarkable things watching the Biden administration staff up is how much more easy it is, how much easier it is to find people who are experienced, who are knowledgeable, and who are diverse. So the communications team is one example, and I think these are all women who I know and who I know are experienced enough not to be under any illusions about their relationships with reporters and reporters being as long as to get a good story. Professional slash ally slash, we have like friendship. The other remarkable thing is there were a number of women available to be chosen as Treasury Secretary. There are a number of African American or Latino people available to be chosen as Defense Secretary or Attorney General or DHS Secretary or whatever. So I think identity politics is a really negative way of looking at what is a good thing, and it's completely not surprising that the civil rights groups are speaking up at this point, because honestly, the squeaky wheel gets the nomination.
Well, yeah, that is entirely true. I
would just say,
go ahead, Kathleen, and then we'll.
To Ruth, I admire greatly, that I expected her to bristle, and it's called a lead. But anyway. I'm also happy to see a cabinet and a government that more closely resembles the country that I live in, and certainly it is not composed of primarily white males, although I do have a few in my house. So I just wanted to clarify that I'm not suggesting that it's a bad thing that we try to pick people that, I mean, obviously, yes, and I agree with you. There are plenty of people who don't happen to be white who are qualified to do all of these jobs. And I think it's wonderful that we're bringing some of those people out into the forefront for people. I mean, I think a lot of Americans don't realize that this can be done efficiently and effectively. And you mentioned Jonathan J. Johnson, who would be, a very, very logical pick for either of those two positions you mentioned. But anyway, that's just to say that we agree, and it's just a matter of column approach.
Before we go on, one of you has your notifications on, and if you could just flip the switch to vibrate, that would be greatly appreciated.
It might be me, and I tried to turn it off, so I can't sleep if it is.
All right. Well, here's that. So I want to ask one more question of you, Ruth, on transition, because you are an attorney, you are a lawyer, and that is the question of the potential or the possibility, or whether he should even be considered, Tony West, who was the deputy at DOJ, at the Department of Justice under then Attorney General Eric Holder. He is wildly experienced. He has, all sorts of knowledge and insight into the Department of Justice. But he's also the brother-in-law to the incoming Vice President of the United States. Do you think that just that one relationship is a disqualifier for him to be considered for a position that under any circumstance he would be wildly qualified for?
I'm gonna say, with no disrespect to Tony West, and not going as far as to say that it's a disqualifier, because I don't think it's a legal disqualifier, that I think it's probably a bad idea in any administration to have somebody who is so closely connected to an official that they may be effectively unfireable, or unsupervisable, and that's not reflecting Tony West at all. I think that's a problem with any administration. Yes, Robert F. Kennedy, but we have laws that prohibit that direct nepotism right now, and that was a bad idea at the time. But particularly following this administration, I think it would send a bad signal. This was an administration that invited all the president's children in to have official and unofficial roles. They were not qualified. Tony West is qualified. I think you want to send a signal as much as possible. And I'm going to take this opportunity, actually, since I spoke not in favor of identity politics, but in favor of diversity, to name my candidate for Attorney General, who happens to be a white man, who is Merrick Garland, the judge who famously was nominated to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Denied, should be on the Supreme Court, has extensive experience at the Justice Department, is judicious enough to make the difficult decisions and to rehab a department that's been so demoralized and almost destroyed by the Trump administration and the latest Attorney General. So my guy for justice is a white man, Merrick Garland.
So we have to talk about the insanity, the 46-minute insanity that was President Trump's video from yesterday. Ruth, I know you have thoughts on this. We'll start with you, and then we'll go to Kathleen.
Well, the president said it was perhaps the most important speech that he's given. Notably, it did not turn up on the front pages of any of my morning newspapers. And that was because it was also, I think, hands down, and this, I do not say this lightly, and there is also a lot of competition for this, but this was hands down the most deranged speech this president or any president has ever given. I don't think there was a single sentence that was factual in any way. It was a 46-minute rant about the unfairnesses that had been inflicted on him throughout his presidency, but in particular, and without substantiation, the way in which the election he insisted had been rigged, was riddled with fraud that is non-existent, and had been stolen from him. And I understand why this is not on the front pages. Well, first of all, we're all a little tired of hearing this from the president. And second of all, you don't want to give ammunition to his disinformation. So to watch it, you have to go to Facebook, where it's featured with a caution that it's not true. It has the little flag on it. But this is the president of the United States saying these things, and not just saying these things that are wrong, but saying them on a day when I think we're at 3,000 or more Americans, more than died in 9/11, who died. He is AWOL from his job. He is not just not solving the problem, he is contributing to the problem. He's hosting more super spreader events at the White House in the form of holiday parties, as if it hasn't gone far enough. And this is just so appalling that I really think it deserves some sunlight and some very harsh criticism.
Kathleen, what do you think?
Well, I agree completely with every word she said, and nothing that he said. The president is his lame duck approach seems to be burn the villages, and he's going out of his way to disrupt his own government as he takes leave. And this rant, as Ruth appropriately names it, it's just one more piece of evidence that he's just not well, not mentally well. He's not able to accept that he lost, and this idea of this vast voter fraud has been debunked by his own attorney general, and Attorney General Barr's defense at last. He has said it's not there. There's no there. And of course, he's likely to be fired as a result of saying something true. That's always been the fate of those within the administration who defy the president's perception of reality, which is nothing like reality. So this is just something I think, it might be something one watches for, just to confirm that this man cannot leave soon enough. But otherwise, I'm perfectly comfortable with other media not repeating it, not running it. I know CNN plans not to run it, and I'm sure others as well. But the fact that he says it's the most important speech he's ever given is yet further confirmation that he's just completely, from day one, I've said, this man is not right. He's just not right. There's something missing. There's some connection that's not really functioning properly in his brain. And I think this is the final piece of damning evidence.
So given that, if you are Kelly Loeffler, or Senator Loeffler, or Senator Perdue, would you want that particular president of the United States winging into your state when you are in a runoff that will determine the balance of power in the United States Senate? Is he value add?
One would think not. However, as we know, the people that still support President Trump don't see anything wrong with what he said in that video, and they buy into the whole myth of this voter fraud. And so, to the extent that he still has some kind of standing with that base and those people who might vote for the Republican candidates, I suppose there's some value there. But if I were any of the candidates, I'd be phoning in and saying, please, we're very we're in tenuous ground here. Don't come. So.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
go ahead, Ruth.
And he's put the Georgia senators in a terrible position because in order to win their runoffs, they have to get people to the polls. How do you get people to the polls? That's not my notifications. That's my puppy whining.
I see in the background.
I've been flying in with treats. Here you go. Can't get people to the polls when you're telling them that their vote doesn't count because it's been rigged by an algorithm in a voting machine that was constructed at the behest of Hugo Chavez. I mean, this is craziness. On the other hand, the people that they need to get out to the polls are true Trump believing voters. They are the Trump base. So Trump is, first of all, they can't get crosswise with Trump. And second of all, they need Trump to help them rally the troops, even if he's simultaneously telling the troops that the vote is, that at least votes that go against him are rigged. Votes that go for him or votes that go for Republicans are obviously not rigged. Sarcasm alert there. So this is just a crazy situation that he's created in Georgia, not least with the Secretary of State who's been denounced by Loeffler and Perdue, and the Republican Secretary of State, and with the governor who has been denounced, but who is a Republican as well, who's been denounced by the president, who now says he regrets having supported his election. This is crazy town.
One thing, yes, President Trump is someone who fires up his base, but he is also someone who fires up the opposition, who fires up Democrats. So I'm looking to see, is he going to pull out, President Trump, more Democrats to the polls than Republicans to the polls in that runoff that's on January 5th, I believe. Real quickly, because we have less than a minute left, Ruth, and I want to ask you about the COVID relief bill. Congress is expected to vote on a new COVID bill on Monday, and the Democrats are reportedly backing a bipartisan effort, cutting their demands by more than half. What are you predict? Well, was this a necessary concession after months of gridlock?
Yes, a necessary concession, but not sufficient, because the person who now needs to concede in the form of being willing to, at the very least, bring this bipartisan bill, to the floor is none other than Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who has not been willing to do that. He cannot be the Grinch who made this horrible Christmas even worse for everybody, and this horrible holiday season even worse for everybody. They really need to get something done.
Kathleen, do you think that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has it within his heart, to bring this bipartisan bill to the floor for a vote in this, in this most important season?
Well, I think there's a very strong possibility for a compromise here. I mean, you know that McConnell has wanted a $550 billion bill passed, and that's failed twice. So I would say I listened to Senator John Thune, his top deputy, who said that he thought there was a good chance for compromise, somewhere between $1 trillion and $550 billion. So in the spirit of the season, it's unfortunate that it's so easy to bring up images of Grinch, but I think that given the season, maybe he'll let it go. I mean, it's surely necessary. It's essential that this thing pass if we're going to keep the engines running in this country and get aid to people who desperately need it, and especially people who just simply don't have jobs, and those who need to have to buck up their businesses so they can stay in business. This is not something just to play with and let founder. But we've also it's got to be attached to a spending bill before we have a threatened, a shutdown, which I also don't think will happen. I think, it's the end. 2020 is almost over. Let's do what's necessary and get on with it.
In this season of giving, I hope the Senate Majority Leader will bring this bill to the floor so that, the American people who have been waiting for resolution to this will get the help that they need. Ruth Marcus, Kathleen Parker, thank you very, very much for coming on First Look.
Thank you, John.
And thank you, as always, for joining us today, and forgive the sunlight that's hit me in the face. Washington Post Live will be back at 11 o'clock Eastern Time today with Senator Mark Warner and Lyft President John Zimmer to discuss the future of work with my colleague, Heather Long. Once again, I'm Jonathan Capehart, opinion writer for the Washington Post. Thank you for watching First Look on Washington Post Live.